Hi, everybody. So, our next session features an online presentation by Dr. Ozyesilpinar. Dr. Ada is an assistant professor in the Department of English at Illinois State University. Her research focuses on border and cultural rhetorics, investigating how non Western cultures are represented and perceived in various contexts. Her talk will explore the role of writing in shaping communication research. Please direct your attention to the screen.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited to join you all this space, this conversation, and thank you so much for inviting me as well. I want to talk about writing today because that's what I do, as all of us. Right? We all do engage in writing in different ways, forms, and shapes. But the way that I do writing, it also informs my teaching as well. As a scholar who is trained in teaching writing to undergraduate and graduate students, as much as other scholars in the field in the United States, I'm very well aware how challenging and daunting writing in itself can be, especially as an international scholar whose first language is not English as well, and understanding that writing is so much more than just using our words, right? It carries culture, it carries linguistic expression, it carries audience, it carries genre. So those are some of the larger points that I want to touch upon today to be really articulate the importance of writing as a tool, writing as a process, and writing as a way of how we carry ourselves, how we join into academic and scholarly conversations, and how we can utilize writing to our writing as a tool for our strengths in that context. So as an international scholar myself, writing doesn't necessarily come super easy, right? That's just my personal experience, but also working with other international scholars, PhD students, master students, and undergraduate students. One of the things that I personally experience in the classroom, beyond the classroom, with the mentorship that I've done, also as a previous writing center director, I'm my first-hand experience has always been the fact that writing becomes a scary thing. How do we engage in effective writing? How do we engage in effective communication through writing that we connect with our audience in the most effective way possible? Because that is the main purpose. How do we deliver our main point? How do we build effective and strong arguments and conversations to connect with our audiences? And when you are an international scholar, right, and that you are writing in a second or foreign language, and a lot of the time, that is mainly the language, English language, and is variant dialects, variant utilizations in different cultural contexts as well. We see that how do we navigate the way that English language is used in different contexts, right? That becomes one of the main challenges that I've experienced, that I've seen many of the students that I work with usually come into work with me like, how do I do that? How do I do this? Like, I say it this way, but sometimes the way that I express myself doesn't necessarily make the impact that I want it to make, right? And that mainly ties to the main struggles with style and tone and idiomatic expressions as well. And that creates a certain level of anxiety. Like, do I sound unnatural? Do I sound incorrect? A lot of the time, it's that idea of like, do I sound correct? The level of correctness. What does it mean to sound correct when you are writing in the English language, right? And that could be, for example, in the United States, we're talking about the American English, the standard form of American English. But when you step outside of the academic context of the English language in the United States, you also experience a different level of how do I sound correct using the English language in different setting as well. Right. So there is this pressure to meet native like standards in academic publishing and presentations. And that mainly creates this level of anxiety. That's again a personal experience and also an experience that I have with a lot of so many graduate students and undergraduate students and fellow international scholars like myself. So one of the first things that I want to articulate is that language carries culture. How that translates itself into writing is that because writing and language, we cannot separate the both, right? So in that context, we need to understand that writing is not just a linguistic process. It's not just a linguistic practice. It's not just about sounding correct grammatically or sounding correct like mechanically, editing or revising. Writing is a very much of a cultural practice. That's a really important aspect, right? That's why in that context, we really need to remind ourselves that if writing is a cultural process and if you're operating through, cultural cues, cultural ways of communicating what that means, how that's going to shape our writing, what at the end, we need to be aware of those moments or those instances or those experiences of cultural mismatch because that can cause confusion, right? Indirectness versus assertiveness, humility versus confidence, what that means in those different cultural settings. When it comes to writing, that language carries in itself. And so when we think of English academic writing, what we're thinking of is that there are specific communication preferences, right? Such as directness, linear structure, a certain level of assertive tone. Those are really important aspects that are part of the larger, in the English language, the global academic community. And understanding these differences help us better navigate writing for global audiences in that context. So if you're going to think writing as a cultural practice, we need to also understand that it's also a situated practice, right? It means that writing as a cultural practice, it's also spatial practice. It means I'm talking about like literal physical spaces, like the room that you're in right now, or more symbolic, metaphoric spaces that we consider, such as the difference between academic conferences or the level of writing that we do for the classroom as well. There is that connection between the physical and the symbolic too. But those spaces, right, they're also situated in those cultural contexts as well. So the culture and the spatial really are connected to one another and shape and inform one another. And that connection is particularly important because every writing act happens in a writing space, right? And in those writing spaces, what we are focusing on is cultural norms, values, and styles of thought. And in those writing spaces, what counts as effective writing is shaped by those different academic cultural traditions, institutional contexts, and values. So we need to be responsive to those practices, those values, and those traditions if we want to accomplish effective writing and effective communication. So let's kind of revisit the idea of a writing space, right? So in that context, when we think of a writing space, we're thinking of the context of communication that shapes how we write. And that context that shapes how we write is particularly focused on our intended target audience. Audience is the most important thing because our main goal, right, is to connect with our audience in an effective way, to deliver our main message, to deliver our main point in a way that we grab our audience's attention, that we articulate why what we talk about is important and why it should matter to them, how and why they should be invested in that conversation. So, audience is the most important thing, right? So, for us to be able to accomplish that effective connection with our audience, we really need to be attuned with the expectations of our main field or study or disciplines, genre conventions and expectations. So when I talk about genre, I'm talking about different styles and types of writing. It could be like a research article, it could be a memo, it could be a report, it could be a conference presentation, right? What are the expectations, rules, and stylistic conventions of that genre? The audience expect in that target field that is part of the our larger writing space. So, at the end of the day, what we talk about when we think of a writing space is those cultural spaces of effective communication, cultural space of effective research, and how we deliver that research in those spaces, right? So, these spaces basically shape how we communicate our ideas and engage in scholarly conversation. And for that to happen, once again, we need to understand the context, particularly the discourse, the conversation, what the audience expects from that conversation, and how we need to accomplish those expectations and meet those expectations, how we can be responsive to those expectations, basically. If I'm going too fast, you can let me know in the chat, but I'm going to leave plenty of space, hopefully, for us to have a Q&A at the end, so we can definitely address any of the questions that you have. So writing, right, basically really, as much as it is informed by our research and practice, it also informs the kind of research and practice that we do, right? Because our main goal at the end of the day is we put that much effort, time, process, right? Intellectual thinking, intellectual commitment to the kind of research that we do. For that research to shine, for that research to really find its community, for that research to really have an impact, it needs to be communicated effectively. So writing becomes not only a mechanical tool, but it becomes an active tool that we utilize, right, as part of our research. It is a really key tool and also a key practice, right? Because writing defines how we present research, build arguments, and engage with knowledge. In that context, the words that we choose and how we organize them at the level of from our titles, from our sentences, from our paragraphs, and how everything flows in a whole piece of writing, how that connects, right? Has a particular influence on our audience, and how that influence is received from our audience particularly important. Good writing builds credibility, it facilitates understanding, and supports knowledge transfer. And as we all know, those are the key outcomes that we want to accomplish with our research. So let's talk about examples of different writing spaces, right? Some of the things that I already articulated, like academic presentations versus journal articles. When we are presenting a script, a PowerPoint presentation, a visual presentation, or whatever that we do, depending on the writing space for a particular academic conference, the discipline, the space, the audience, right? We make different choices. We make different stylistic, linguistic choices to meet the expectations of our audience. But when we do that, the way that we structure everything for an academic presentation, it's not going to be the same when we are structuring everything for a journal article, for a research article that we're aiming to publish. Our tone changes, our style changes, how we are building our argument, how we are organizing our argument, how we are organizing our paragraphs, how everything is coming together. Everything looks different. How the knowledge, the content, the conversation remains the same, but the writing, how it transfers from one space to another, changes based on the context, the cultural values, the linguistic practices, the audience expectations, and the genre conventions, right? Those are particularly really important. Those shifts, those changes, we need to pay attention to those and make necessary adjustments, basically, in how we are establishing our tone, our credibility, our audience, our authority, and our identity in that context. So the main idea is what we do, right, as part of our jobs, as part of our research, as part of what we do, we are always constantly, and that's something you're already always doing. You're already doing that, right? We are always adapting to different writing spaces. We are always and should ask ourselves, who am I writing for? What do they expect from me in this particular context, in this particular writing space? So what we do, we learn and understand the genre conventions. We learn and understand different literature reviews, how to write literature reviews in different contexts, right? For different disciplines, for different settings. How to even structure and write a method sections or methodology sections, how to deliver our results, how to organize that information, right? What I found to be the most helpful in that context is to analyze other effective texts, pieces of writing in a target field, in a target writing space for a target audience, right? If we are aiming to publish in a particular journal, right? Let's say that we all have our dream journals, right? This flagship journal in our fields that we want to get an article published in that journal. So, a really effective practice is to look into the other published papers in that journal, how everything is structured, how everything is organized, the writing style, the tone, the type of scholarship that is being published, how everything is organized. That's also a really helpful practice because it means that that piece has been considered as effective writing and as effective communication. That's why it's published over there. Taking that as an effective sample, right? Studying it is going to help us immensely, right? So, what we do in that process, we're understanding and learning journal specific norms from citation styles to tone to audience. And even beyond that, each journal is something that we all know, right? Is going to have their own expectations. Even when a journal says that I want you to use this particular citation style, APA, Chicago, right? Whatever it is that they prefer, a lot of the time they also have their own specific versions of that citation style. We want APA, but we have our set of specific rules that we want you to follow. So being aware of those expectations are particularly important because that gives us an insight of the target audience who reads that journal, what their expectations are going to be for us as well. So in that context, what we're starting to build is strategies. What we're starting to build in this context is strategies for effective writing, right? Reading widely and being analytical in our field, engaging with other scholarship, not only to engage with the content and the arguments and the conversations, but also the writing that is taking place in itself. Imitating, not necessarily as copying, but imitating, learning good practices, and adopting those good writing models are going to help us immensely, right? And another, this is a great practice, helpful practice is joining writing groups. I have been part of a writing group since I started my current position as a tenure track faculty at the Illinois State University. It was the cohort that I was part of when we were hired in the fall semester of 2020. And all of us from different colleges and different departments, we started a writing group. Every semester, we meet at a certain date, at a certain time, 2 to 3 hours. And at the beginning of the writing session, what we do is we set a goal, whatever project that we're working on that day. We set our goals, right? And we sit down and write for 2 to 3 hours, taking breaks whenever necessary. And at the end of the writing session, we discuss what were the goals that we were able to accomplish during that writing session. I found that to be really, really helpful. First of all, the main reason is we all know an academic semester how busy it can be, right? Especially once the grading starts, once the meetings with the students starts, and beyond the teaching itself, different service commitments that we have, the different meetings that we need to attend to, conference presentations, also life itself, all the other responsibilities that we have beyond our jobs, right? During a semester, there are times that I'm unable to sit down and do any type of writing, but I know that I'm going to finish the week with a level of writing that I'm going to do because I have my writing group. That time that I reserve for that writing group, that gives me consistency in my writing. And I think that is such an important aspect, consistency. It doesn't have to be this long hours of writing that we do in a day or 3 days or weeks. It's to me, it's if I can create time and space, right? Even if it's like a 30 minutes a day or an hour a day, or like the writing group time that I have during a week, right? And that I'm sticking to that and I'm building something slowly but progressively, giving myself enough time to engage with that writing, giving myself enough time to revise, edit, question, make changes. That's really important. And writing groups creates a support system, but as much it also creates accountability, right? Because when you set goals, you're creating accountability for yourself. How am I going to meet those goals for myself? That's really important. Because in that context, you're also building a peer network. Because in those writing group spaces, you also seek really advice from one another. And because you also start sharing some of the struggles, some of the issues that you're having with your writing, maybe writing blocks, maybe different kind of struggles that you're having. And then your peers start giving you advice, they start giving you strategies, they start giving you helpful tips. And that I also found to be really, really helpful for me to grow as a writer because those strategies come from people in other disciplines, right? What worked for them, what didn't work for them. It also gives me a different insight into how I'm approaching my writing too. And that helps me to build a toolkit basically, right? To explore and learn how I'm going to utilize effective writing strategies and practices. And that also leads me to the importance of seeking feedback often, a lot, as much as you can. Sharing or writing with your peers that you trust in your field, you trust in your departments, and get feedback from them and revise actively. I think revision process is the most important process and aspect of the writing itself. Because what I prefer a lot of the time in my own writing that I like the state of having something written. As a first draft, it doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be this, oh, I just sat down and wrote this article and it's ready to go. I'm not a writer like that. I need more time and space to build something. And a lot of the time, that process is very slow for me. So I know who I am as a writer. So I make sure that I give myself enough time and space to be able to finish a project. But once I'm done, once I have something written as a full draft, the revision process is really, really important because in the revision process, going back and forth, going back and forth in terms of how I'm building an argument, how I'm articulating a point, how I'm providing evidence, how I'm providing examples to support what I'm saying I'm also giving myself really enough space to focus on that process to make sure that I am addressing everything possible that I can think of that I know my audience is going to expect from me to address in my writing. So revision is the key. I cannot emphasize that enough. Because the revision process gives ourselves the space to embrace our voices. A lot of the time, that's something that I experience myself as an international scholar, but I also experience and seen that in other international students and scholars too, is to kind of move away from our voices as writers, who we are as writers, how we represent ourselves, how we present ourselves in our writing, because of that writing anxiety that I talked about at the beginning of my presentation. But our voices are unique. Our voices carry our own cultural values, our own knowledge practices, and that once we start bringing them into our writings, while we are being responsive to the conventions of the genre and audience expectations, and finding ways to position our also like cultural values and practice in our writing, right? And find effective writing strategies to blend them together what we start producing is something unique. And uniqueness is important. Authenticity is particularly important, right? So we don't want to hide that necessarily, right? Because that represents our own rich cultural practices and how we're contributing to the knowledge in our own fields of study, right? So what we want to do, we want to balance clarity that is expected from us with authenticity, right? We don't want to erase our identity to sound native, basically. So some of the final tips that I want to articulate that what we are talking about is viewing writing as a process, not just the final product, but the whole process itself and how we're approaching that process. Because once we focus on the process, what we're starting to understand is our own writing practices, what works for us and what does not work for us. So we want to focus on the practices, tools, and strategies that work for us and build on them, right? And then use those to really amplify our writing voices while being responsive to genre expectations and audience expectations. That means that we need to be really patient with our growth, how we're approaching and engaging with academic writing, right? Because it's not necessarily something that we have already, that it's something that we learn. So approaching this as a learning process, that as an ongoing learning process, it's never finished. We always learn. That's why we always grow as writers, right? That's why it means that we need to be stay aware of the evolving and changing norms in our discipline, right? Shifting expectations in our disciplines. And we want to advocate for more inclusive and multilingual approaches to scholarly communication. That is so important, especially in a global context now. So some of the key takeaways that I want to articulate is once we are engaging in writing in English, right, in a second or foreign language, what we're focusing on the linguistic challenges and differences as much as cultural differences as well. Writing shapes how we do and share research and communication, and effective writing requires awareness of audience, genre, goals, and norms. And writing is a both cultural and practical tool. What we want to do is to use it to express our voice and shape our field. So, again, I told you, I hope I did a good job keeping this short and sweet and effective. And I wanted to make sure that we have enough time for any questions that you have so we can have an active discussion.
Thank you so much for your excellent presentation. Um, I just have a comment or maybe a sort of a question that I do agree with you that we are we don't have a background of the English, most of the people, and it used to be very difficult for us for writing any a piece of literature or any paper. But I just want to know, because you are in Lanai, and obviously the Western universities are always ahead of the Asian or South Asian side. But we have found a solution to the language barrier, that is artificial intelligence, and obviously there are certain softwares we do have, and we have been using these softwares for these linguistic problems. So, what do you think that if these types of technological assistance we do have even in the South Asian or in the global South? Okay, I've been working with a Czech Republic medical scientist, and she indigenously from Russia, and she said that I am so much amazed to see that Pakistani people are very good in their English, not only in their rhetoric but also in writings. So, do you think that is it a barrier, or it's a problem in the current era where we have a lot of AI tools and so many softwares? So, why we are so much now focusing on the linguistic barriers? Thank you.
That's an excellent question. And that has been a recent conversation. It's actually like a chaos here in the States right now because everyone is freaking out about AI, right? No one knows what to do. And whether we like it or not, our students are using them. I know my students are using them. I can tell that they're using them. And my department actually in the spring semester recently held a symposium, AI in the Humanities. And we had excellent scholars, excellent presentations talking about the utilization of AI. And particularly, what I really appreciated was the conversations that are coming from scholars of color in the field, that their approach and take on AI, right? ChatGPT, Grammarly, and so many other tools that are available. And that the reason that this creates that much chaos because whether I mean we all are all aware of also the settler colonial rules of the English language, its utilization to gatekeep, right? Particularly to determine who has access to academic spaces, whose articles are published and why they are published, right? And also, especially in communication research here, there has been a really active scholarly conversation and publications that are focusing on how to challenge, question, but move beyond those settler colonial practices and make sure that the field, the conversations are not just, shaped by, white scholars in the field, because that has always been the practice too. Particularly some pieces that recently came out in Review Communication, Communication Quarterly, have been really impactful in the field as well. So those recent conversations, one of the presentations that I found it to be absolutely fascinating was the fact that artificial intelligence is changing the game because it is making, as you were so eloquently and so brilliantly articulated yourself, it is moving us away from just the linguistic accuracy aspect, right? Oh, you do not sound like native enough, or you do not sound that enough. Artificial intelligence is now giving us that edge, right? And once it is utilized to that end, it creates a different playing field when it comes to publication equity. I think that's particularly important. Laura Gonzalez, she is an associate professor at University of Florida. Particularly her work in communication, technical communication, UX design, and multilingual communication is really impactful. She talks about that, power dynamics and cellular colonial roots of English language utilization, and also addresses that, AI gives us that edge now, right? Obviously, there are dangers to it, because what I've seen, the way that my students use it, right? Like they use it just to get the AI to write for them. So the level of, okay, we don't want to do that, right? Like we want you to be critical thinkers. We want you to be thinking for yourselves. I don't want you to use AI to think for you, to say what you want to say, or basically to use AI for you to basically say anything without you actually saying what you're thinking. So it is, again, kind of one of the main things that I address in my presentation, finding that balance of authenticity, right? Our voice, what we're saying, how we're saying it, but using effective tools and strategies to, right, in our benefit. So that's how I'm approaching AI, because that's something that I use also in my writing. I've been using it, I've been experimenting with it, because if I'm going to tell my students use it or don't use it without understanding how something works, um, that's not a good idea, right? Like I need to be able to figure it out for myself. And one thing that I realized, it can be used as a really great writing tool, but not to replace the writing that we do, because the writing that we do means that it is engaging in critical thinking, it is engaging in meaning making, it is engaging in knowledge building. We AI cannot do that the way that we do, because AI is not perfect. I'm teaching a summer course right now. I just finished grading my students' midterm exams. And one of the things that you immediately understand, that, okay, you used AI because this is not the text that we read, or this particular citation that you have doesn't even exist. Especially when you're experts in our fields, we know the material, right? You're like, yeah, I know who you're citing here because I read that text, but we did not read it. But you're also citing it in the, not correctly, not even correctly. It doesn't even fit to the conversation. That's not what I asked you to write about in this particular question. So it's really easy to like detect that with AI, right? So it is, for me, pedagogically, for me in research as well, it is using AI to improve the writing that we do as a tool of support, but not replacing the writing that we do. And I know there's still a lot of questions, there's a lot of tension, controversial, like, tension around how AI is going to impact, our teaching, our research, or the conversations that we're having. But one thing that is happening is already here, and that people are already using it. So I think the important part is like, how are we going to utilize it in the most effective way possible? That is my main take on, and I think the main tension is that once we use it effectively, it's going to create a different kind of approach to publication process and how publication takes place, right? In also like in Western publications as well, in those writing spaces as well. I think that's one of the reasons that also creates a level of tension too.
I totally appreciate you, and I think it's a common thinking of every teacher. And the last thing, taking the advantage of your presence in states, that when we talk about the Gen Z are now more into the other sort of communication, which is very slang, and sometimes it's very difficult to decode that, and it's common throughout the globe. So, what do you foresee that if that has become a new normal, that the Gen Z's conversation, which they only understand, and many films, recently a film Adolescence was on that particular topic, that how that communication was disastrous, but no one could detect it. what do you foresee that the Gen Z, the Gen Alpha, who are now going to make a new language for themselves, would they be able to write the research paper, or their rhetoric in written would be the same, or do we had to be very alert as a academician to just guide them? Because what the situation we have been anticipating, especially at the school level, that their conversation is very difficult for the parents, for the teachers to understand, and they only through the symbolic communication they communicate everything, which is not understandable for the people like us of Gen X, Y. So what do you foresee for this?
Generational differences, that's a great question that kind of ties really well into the idea of writing spaces, right? Because what we are seeing right now is the shifting of the writing spaces with the cultural practices, how the cultural practices grow and change and shift. That's what we see in the writing spaces as well. Um, it Sometimes it is frightening. Actually, like yesterday morning at breakfast, I was talking to my sister because I got an email from a student that they were asking me to help them with something, which I'm not quite sure what it was, because I'm like, I'm not quite sure what you're saying in your email. This doesn't really make sense to me a lot because you're panicky, you're freaking out, but like this is not like a really formed, clearly articulated email, right? As simple as writing an email as a genre, right? How do we follow the genre conventions when you're writing an email to your professor? How do you address them? How do you open the email itself? How do you make the main point? Like, what is the main focus of that email? You're asking for help, but what is the specific help that I'm supposed to provide you, right? Um, One thing that I'm seeing with Gen Z is, as a generation, that not only were introduced to social media, right? I think millennials, the main difference for us is that we are part of a timeline that social media was not there, like the internet and everything. Like we were introduced to social media, we built social media basically. But Gen Z, especially Gen Alpha, right? They are growing up with it. They do not know or remember a time that doesn't exist for them. It's not part of their experience that social media didn't exist. So the communication that takes place on social media, right? Not just the words, but also the visual, it really creates a different level of linguistic and critical thinking for them. Um, there are ways that we can definitely help them to see that as leverage, right? How you are utilizing the way that you are expressing yourself and your ideas that already exist practices and abilities that you have, not just the words, but also the visual communication. I think visual communication is extremely powerful, but how are we going to leverage that and build on that is particularly important. But the challenge definitely comes in for me with Gen Z is um, they don't really think about how they sound. They don't really talk about their tone. They don't really talk about think about their style, even as simple as addressing someone properly, right? Because that's not how they interact with their peers on social media, but also they don't really are aware of the difference of audience. Because how are you going to navigate that in the network spaces of World Wide Web, right? That audience is really broad, right? And they only know how to communicate with their peers and they don't necessarily think about kind of the different like shifting context or rules of writing spaces. So that definitely creates a challenge. And so, in my opinion, as a scholar and teacher of writing, is addressing those challenges starts in the classroom and how we mentor our students. Would that create the kind of effect or impact that we wanted to have in the larger setting? It's really hard to foresee that, but it is something that I think we are responsible for of doing, and that is the hopeful answer that I have for you on that.